Zuko staggered back as the other kids stared in awestruck horror. The room was filled, cluttered with items, but nothing that the air nomads had left behind. No, everywhere the eye could reach was filled with different horrific, painful-looking weapons of steel and iron, blades and traps and machines. In the center of all was a large red tarp emblazoned with the regal symbol of the Fire Nation. He felt like he was going to be sick. "This is a nightmare," Aang breathed. Zuko looked for a bucket. "You don't understand," a voice came from behind. Nerves worn and shot beyond compare, Zuko responded with blades held high, pointing them at the machinist, even as they shook and trembled along with his hands. He only lowered the weapons when his haze of guilt, fear, horror, no, please no, cleared enough to recognize the blue and brown figure beside the man as Sokka. "You're making weapons for the Fire Nation!" Aang accused. This would be a great moment for Zuko to take a quick timeout, or it would have been if the fight or flight instincts hadn't been systematically destroyed for him for the past life. This was too much. It was a lot. The others were demanding answers, but he could barely think, much less speak. The machinist's words faded out, registering in his mind through a wave of fog. He shouldn't be reacting like this, should he? Maybe it was okay to be a little upset at such objectively disturbing surroundings, but this? He felt like his head was swimming, like he was getting sick. He was filled with horror, but it was helping his people to win the war. Hadn't he already determined that this war was a waste? He thought he accepted that he was a traitor to the throne months ago. He had renounced his father in the cave, and realized that he would never get the throne at the same time. Then he acted against his nation by rescuing Aang from Pai-Ho's stronghold, accepting he had become a real traitor. He'd realized then that he didn't agree with the pointless war. Then, he actively aided the nation's most notorious traitor, and he never felt prouder of his people than when he'd been surrounded by deserters, being told that he had caused an entire division to abandon their nation. He thought he accepted that his people had become the enemies of the world rather than the saviors that his tutors had proclaimed. But this, maybe it was the day, the result of stewing in rage and guilt and sadness. But this felt like it broke him. His people had taken a place heralded by only peace and compassion, and brought it to violence, suffering, and death. They had forced interlopers into this once sanctuary, leading it to being desecrated and disrespected and destroyed. Even then, they could not allow one bit of peace to evade their warmongering grasp. Instead, some general threatened to destroy a temple that housed nothing the Fire Nation wanted, for the simple joy of destroying refugees who were essentially harmless. He realized that his people had done terrible things in the name of the Fire Lord. He'd seen the scars and the corpses. He faced Zhao and saw the razor patch of land. He believed it, but he hadn't really known it until this moment. Surrounded in the colors of a war room and seeing the horror and terror in the eyes of those around him at the very hint of the Fire Nation might appear. It was then that his heart knew that his head had been shying away from this. His people were committing atrocities that were marring their souls just as they were ruining their opponents' lives. They needed to be stopped. He needed to stop them. He couldn't fool himself into thinking himself loyal any longer. Zuko gave up looking for a bucket. He ran to the nearest window, thankful that the monks had appreciated airflow more than they disliked the cold. He leaned out of it, sparing a second to hope that there was no gliders beneath him as he unceremoniously lost his lunch. "Zuko!" Katara and Sokka cried, rushing to him with wide, concerned eyes. Zuko wasn't sure where Aang, Tio, and his father had left, but that was fine. The last thing he wanted near him that moment was a father. "Sorry, man," Sokka said softly. "I didn't even think." "This must be really hard for you," Katara said kindly. I don't feel good," the Fire Nation teen moaned. The girl immediately stepped back, water rushing from her water skin glowing blue. The inexperienced girl's brows knitted as she pressed the glowing water to his head. She frowned. "You feel off. I'm not sure what it is. You don't feel sick, not physically at least." Zuko felt like he was dying. He moaned and sagged into Sokka's arms, which was close to the only thing keeping him upright. The girl's eyes tracked him with concern. "Come on, let's find him a bed or someplace to rest." "Can I have some tea?" Zuko slurred, his raspy voice even rougher than normal. Yeah, buddy. I'm sure we can find you some tea." "Okay." The world moved disappropriate to time. He blinked and they were down the hall. Blinked again and they were surrounded by other refugees who watched with concerned eyes. Again, and he was in a bed as an elderly man whispered to his friends. Zuko caught the coattails of the conversation, something about an unnatural sickness arising when the mind and body were at war with one another. Zuko wanted to laugh. The rest of the world was at war. Why shouldn't he be? Assuming he wasn't already. He was born in the war of his father's design, a war against the hairs in front of him, a war in which his greatest opponent was his sister the instant she started to spark. He was forged in a war council, tested by fire in an arena. He was banished to meet the war, and instead came face to face with some of his greatest victims, who still claimed life. His very existence was centered on the war. Whatever this was, it was nothing in comparison. Zuko coughed weakly, Katara's concerned voice rising as cool water brushed his forehead. The world changed, faded. Was he dreaming? This felt like the realest thing to ever happen to him, but it made no sense. He was kneeling upon the flaming dais of the Fire Lord, a position he long since lost the right to. He wondered how he would ever been foolish enough to think it could one day be his. His face was whole, and his hair was long and expertly groomed, no longer the short, shaggy mane that had started forming since he cut his unhealthy hair off after being rescued. Legions of soldiers bowed before him awaiting their orders. He was horrified by the sight. A pair of dragons snaked along the pillars behind him, long, sinewy bodies coiling around the elaborate architecture. The blue dragon spoke in Jet's voice, charming and persuasive even when you knew the rat hidden under his smolder. "What are you waiting for?" it asked. "You know how this works. You've seen it your entire life. The strongest get stronger. They deserve to use their strength to get more. Only those stronger than them deserve to stand in their way. Look at the might of your armies. You have the power, and you have the right. You saw the world, and the entire world can be yours." "But I don't think I want that." The dragon laughed cruelly. "Really, Firebender? You have the opportunity here to be great. And what is a little violence, a few lost lives in the grand scheme of things? Once you have them in your power, you get to decide what to do with the nations. You could help them. The Fire Nation is great among all the lies you've been told. You know that's true. If you ruled, you could get to decide how that greatness is spread. Just give the command. The war is yours to win, if only." "No!" the red dragon cried, his voice the unclear voice of Aang. "Don't listen to them, Zuko. You are powerful, but you're also wise. You have seen, though, so many lies recently. Don't go blind to them now. You know what command you really have to give. You have the power to stop it." "But they're my people. I want what's best for them." "What's best for them is power," the blue dragon hissed, voice compelling. "The quest for power is what's hurting them," the red argued. "Look at them, Zuko. Really look." Zuko did. The once pristine uniforms were worn and stained, each and every one of them dirty. Some men were slung, their eyes the glassy dull of corpses. Hundreds dead, mixed in almost indiscriminately with those beside them. Each and every figure's hands were dyed blood red, a dye that he knew would never erase. Most men kept their eyes glued to the floor. They refused to look at their hands. They hated to be reminded of what the color came from. "They're suffering, Zuko," the red dragon said softly. "They're your people, and they are suffering." "They only need to fight a little more," the blue dragon promised. "Once it's all over, their suffering will end." But as they waited, the stains on the arms grew darker, expanded further. Soldiers wept. "How can I make it stop?" he asked the red dragon. The creature pointed with the snout to an object at the other side of the unending war chamber. On it was a scale out of balance. On one side was the statue of Sozin, of Zulan, of Ozai, of Zula. On the other, a large glowing arrow. Somehow Zuko knew it was perfectly weighted so that if he got on the scale with the arrow, it would balance out perfectly. He rose from his strict position, taking a step toward the scale. But as he did, the legions of armies mirrored him. All but the corpses got to their feet and settled into a ready position. "You will have to go against them," the red dragon said, sorrow lacing its tone. "They will not willingly let you pass, but if you can make it, you can save them." Zuko hesitated, seeing his people stare back at him. The blue dragon at his back continued to talk through the merits of the strong taking what they wanted, of fighting to get and keep and survive. He took a deep breath, ignoring the beast, and let out a furious burst of flame as he leapt into the fray, eyes locked on the balance sitting far away. He fought. He fought against his people. He fought for his people. He opened his eyes. "Do you think he's going to be okay?" Aang asked wearily, biting his lip as he stared at his ill friend. They were meeting at the rooms they had given Zuko. A simple living space with plenty of large windows to let in fresh air and sunlight. The elder team mumbled in his sleep, jerking this way and that as Katara gently bent globes of cool water toward his face so he can drink. The boy tried to ignore the small voice at the back of his mind that said it might be better if Zuko just slept through everything. "I don't know, Aang," Katara said softly. "I don't even know for sure what's wrong. I can't sense anything wrong with him, and he seemed fine until... It was pretty upsetting," Sokka allowed, "and it would have been worse for..." Tio shot the older teen a confused look, but Sokka tensed up and refused to say a word as he started pacing the overfilled space. "We're running out of time, though. Zuko's been out for days. The soldier's deadline's in a few hours. What are we going to do if he's still sick when they get here?" "We trust the plan," Sokka said, all considered to contrast Aang's doubt. "We have the advantage in the air. We're prepared and we're underestimated. We can win this." Katara nodded. "If he's this sick now, he won't exactly be getting up and walking around in the middle of the battle. I don't like leaving him here any more than you do, but this might be the safest place for him." "But if we lose," Aang protested, but Sokka interrupted. "If we lose, nowhere is safe." "We won't lose," Tio said, his voice pained with a confidence at odds with the fear in his eyes. "We can't." Zuko suddenly gasped, lurching forward in a sitting position. He stared straight ahead out the window, not sparing a single glance for the others in the room. "We're lied to, you know," he said, voice low and rumbling, interpreting any cries of joy that his movement had generated. Aang gulped, suddenly unsure if Zuko wanted to have this conversation with Tio in the room. Still, the boy seemed like he needed to say something. "What do you mean?" "From the moment we first entered school, no, from birth, we're lied to. Growing up, we're taught the Fire Nation was the greatest civilization in history." Tio gasped as he realized the implication behind those words. His hands tightened on the wheel of his cart. Zuko glanced his way, but didn't stop talking. "And somehow, that war was our way of sharing our greatness with the rest of the world." He laughed, somewhat ironically, sarcastically. What an amazing lie that was. As long as we're in our homes, we would never know the lie. We would think the Fire Nation was the epitome of culture, of advancement, of... He snorted cruelly and gestured to Tio, "of medical innovation. By the time anyone from our nation is in a place where they could learn the truth, they're in the army, forced to comply with the orders or become traitors and die. But not me. I see the truth. The people of the world are terrified of the Fire Nation. They don't see our greatness. They hate it, and we deserve it." He looked down, and Aang wanted to swoop forward to comfort him. Zuko didn't deserve hate. Before he could figure out what to say, Zuko continued. The Fire Nation has created an era of fear in the world. If we don't want the world to destroy itself, we need to replace it with an era of peace and kindness. I'm the only one who knows enough of the truth to do that. The boy got to his feet, taking his swords off the floor and attaching them to his belt. Madame Wu wasn't able to read my destiny accurately, but I believe I can see it now. No more half-hearted help. Aang, I'm going to make sure you have the chance to bring peace to the world. If that means directly fighting against my people, I'll do what I must. He smiled dimly, checking his reflection in the blades of his swords. I asked only that when this is all over, don't think about moments like this when the Fire Nation is a faceless enemy coming to cause pain. I would ask you to remember the Fire Festival, and how the woman gave Sokka a second spark stick when he accidentally dumped his water. I asked you to remember the deserter camp, and how the soldiers at Gamepai led the Earth Kingdom natives to safety. I know the Fire Nation seems evil to you now, and some I believe truly are, but most are just people. People who have been deceived. I ask you to keep that in mind. The room rang silent for a few moments, the team's gravely serious words ringing in the empty air. Finally, Sokka spoke. That fever is still talking, huh, bud? It's not! Zuko fumed, but Aang stepped forward. His gray eyes met Zuko's gold. Aang felt a connection there, a stirring of something. He had never thought of Zuko as distant before, but he realized just how much the older teen had been holding back. He wasn't holding anything back now. Aang knew that the other boy had laid himself open, presenting himself and his truth to the group in a way that brought pain fresh to the surface. The boy had usually hidden behind layers and layers of protective spikes, like a porky lizard. But here he had made himself vulnerable. The Avatar spoke, and though he was not in the Avatar state, he felt the weight of 100 lives pressing on him as he vowed. I promise, Zuko. I promise. The elder teen nodded, then as his days in bed called out to him, he collapsed back onto the mat. They sang, please tell me someone has food. Sokka? The water-tribe boy had moved forward to his friend, a large smile stretching across his face even as he made falsely insulting, sputtering noises. Why do you ask me? You always have food. No, I'm always hungry. That's like the opposite. He gripped Zuko's shoulder, eyes shining with pride. Just give me whatever jerky you're hiding. How did you... Ugh, fine. No! Katara argued, her eyes surprisingly wet. Her eyes were suspiciously wet, but she managed to keep herself together as she moved to the small pot that had been keeping warm by virtue of a pile of dying coals. You've been sick. Jerky won't be good for you right now. Here, I made some congee. Like Che taught you? I don't have the right spices, she confessed, but it's simple and warm. Fine, I'm hungry enough for anything. Tio voiced, looking between the group awkwardly. Are we just going to ignore the whole Zuko is Fire Nation thing? Sokka shrugged, but Aang noticed that he moved to place himself between Tio and his friend. I mean, I think he's pretty much explained everything. Do you have any additional questions? Tio's voice scrunched in confusion, his eyes darting around the room, lingering on Zuko the longest before he seemed to make a decision. I guess not. That actually explains a lot. Good to, have you on our side, I guess. Zuko nodded, toasting the other boy with a congee bowl and started digging in. Aang grinned. This was going to go great. Zuko arched his leg in a powerful kick, cutting through the chain of the tank pulling itself up the mountain. Before he gave him a spare pang of guilt at sending his people to their death. Another grapple hook shot out of the vehicle front, and he had to dodge to the side to keep from being impaled by it. By the time he was on his feet again, the closest tank had crested the ridge and was spewing fire at them. The boy dodged, attempting to block or dispel the attacking flames, but his chi was still too weak, and he could only succeed in getting a few new scars on his arm. The boy cursed, muttering in anger at how he would have been much more help with a glider, but the refugees had already signed them out when he had awoken. They had only a few gliders, and they needed to make sure the most experienced flyers got them. Zuko rolled to avoid a burst of air from Aang, watching in horror as the unturned vehicle easily righted itself and started rolling toward them once again, never once halting their barrage of fire. Suddenly Katara was there, moving ice and wrecking the mechanisms of the car. But the sheer number of attacks was overwhelming their group of 3, and they had to be saved by a flying bison. Zuko scrambled onto Appa behind Aang and Katara, and could only join them in horror as they watched the soldiers advance. They landed, to even worse news as Teo immediately warned them they were out of bombs. Even the arrival of the war balloon didn't save the day, as Sokka the mechanic ran out of ammunition right before the Fire Nation ran out of soldiers. Suddenly, however, Sokka was shouting at them, crying for Zuko. Immediately, one of the refugees handed off their glider, and Zuko ran off the cliff with reckless abandon as he jumped to his friend. Sokka grinned at him. "Rotten eggs!" he declared. Zuko blinked at him blankly. "I have no clue what that means." Sokka pointed down to a crevice, which was indeed starting to reek of rotten eggs. "Think we can get some firepower down there?" Zuko swallowed uncertainly. He still had yet to actually make a flame despite Zhong's teaching. Sokka grimaced. "I have a plan B if not, but it would be better for all of us if I didn't need to do it." The firebender nodded in resolve. "I can try." He returned to the temple. "Aang, with me," he called, barely pausing to see the orange of the staff expand. He whirled his glider around, swooping even closer to the dangerous crevice. With one hand he let go of the glider, urging his chi into his palm with every fiber of his being. Nothing happened. He tried again, and again, and again. Nothing but a thin wisp of smoke. Zuko growled, his eyes flashing with rage as he pulled out every bit of fury and anger that had been simmering in him for the past few days. Every hint of guilt and fury and passion that the horror of his temple had stirred up. Still nothing. He was going to fail. They were all going to fail, and it would be his fault. He pushed at his chi again, but still nothing. This wasn't fair. Why could his bending never be good enough? He just wanted to protect them. The boy let out a scream of anger, jerking back in shock as a flare of flame slipped from his lips. "Oh." He smirked. He could work with this. Zuko jerked the glider sharply, banking it into his flying upside down. He flipped, sparks flying from his mouth and then catching the thin material of the glider. The light green turned black as the orange-red flames licked across it. He planted his feet on the flying vessel, kicking it away as he lifted one arm to the air. Aang caught the arm, swinging away as the flaming glider fell into the crevice. Aang's flight wobbled a bit as he corrected for the extra weight. "Zuko, you did it! You created fire!" The firebender grinned. "I did!" He laughed. Gliding had brought him joy, but nothing close to this. Aang swooped close to the war balloon, and Zuko released his grip right before the Avatar banked away. Using the momentum, leaped for the balloon basket, gripping the side of the wicker for a moment before pulling himself over the edge, just as the world behind him exploded. Distracted, Zuko looked back and Sokka had pulled him in the rest of the way. "Did I do that?" "Yep, and look, it worked! They're retreating!" Zuko looked, and with a rush of relief, he saw that indeed, the armies were retreating, with minimal casualties as well. Those in the tank on this hill didn't make it, but otherwise the bulk of the army was walking away. Good. It was good. Zuko let out a sigh of relief, starting when sparks slipped from his lips. "Oops." The mechanic watched him carefully, before loudly whispering to Sokka, "Psst, I think your friend might be a firebender." Sokka laughed nervously. The mood was victorious when they landed the air balloon. The population of the temple all gathered in the courtyard, rejoicing in their win. Aang made a beeline for Teo. "You know what? I'm really glad you guys live here now," the airbender said. "It's like the hermit crabs. Maybe they weren't born here, but you found this empty shell and made it your home." They continued to talk, but Zuko's mind wandered. Where was his home? Was it Caldera? Certainly not now. Maybe it never had been. But it wasn't the cave either. Maybe he didn't have one anymore. Maybe he never had. That might have brought despair for some, but Zuko saw it as an opportunity. He had the chance to make his own. He glanced at his three companions as Aang promised Tio he would teach them how to use the special Air Temple onions for their fruit pies. He thought he was making a pretty good start.